Welcome back to the Word on Fire Show. I'm Matthew Petrusek, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute and the host of the Word on Fire Show. Thank you for joining us. Bishop Barron has long defended religious freedom as a universal human right. As part of his ongoing advocacy, which includes a new book on how to confront persecution against Christians, he has recently completed serving on a presidential religious liberty commission charged with ensuring that people of all faiths can participate fully in society without fear of violence or unjust discrimination. One of the few Catholic ecclesial voices on the commission, his work addressed multiple abiding and practical questions. For example, at the conceptual level, what is religious freedom and what role should the government play in protecting it? How can we define religious freedom in a way that prevents one religion's exercise of their freedom from infringing upon the freedom of other religions or on those who claim no religion at all? And at the more concrete level, where right now are the greatest threats to religious freedom, and what can we do to combat them? Here to address these and related questions and to discuss his experience serving on the Presidential Commission is Bishop Robert Barron. Welcome back to the studio, Bishop.
Thanks, Matt. Always good to be with you.
So today we're discussing your work on the Presidential Religious Liberty Commission, as your term is drawing to a close.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do, what have you been up to recently?
Well, I feel like I've been driving all over the diocese. You know, my life as a bishop, it's true of most bishops of dioceses, you spend part of your time at the chancery office, going to meetings and meeting with people and making the kind of administrative decisions you have to make. But a lot of the job of bishop, I think, is being out with the people. You have to go where the sheep are, you know, if you're the shepherd. So very recently I went to one of our big high schools here called Cotter School. And Cotter is a great place. It's got grade school kids and high school kids. It's named for my predecessor, the first bishop of Winona. And it's just a really vibrant place. And I had a Q&A session with the upperclassmen that was really good. And then mass with the whole community. And then I had lunch with the kids in the cafeteria. So I love doing that. I've kind of prioritized the high schools in my diocese and try to get out to see them as much as possible.
I know they love it when you arrive and visit.
Lourdes, I was at recently, where your son was going till very recently.
He's a graduate there.
Right.
Let's now turn to the topic. So you recently are ending a term on the Presidential Religious Liberty Commission. We'll look at some both conceptual and practical questions related to your work there. But before we do, tell us a little bit about how this opportunity actually came about. It's not something you were looking for.
No, it was a complete surprise. I get a call out of the blue from actually someone at the USCCB, the Bishops' Conference, and they said, the White House is looking for your number. I said, what? I really did. I was flabbergasted. Like, what does the White House want? I thought I was in trouble. And so it turned out they wanted to reach out to me about this prospect, you know. And once I heard it, I thought, well, why would I say no? I mean, here's an opportunity to be around the table when public policy is being formed in regard to a very important matter. So the bishops of our country for the past, 25, 30 years have made this a high priority, religious liberty. So, you know, I thought, why would I say no to it? The inspiration I had was Father Hesburgh, the legendary president of Notre Dame University back in the late 20th century. And Hesburgh sat on 16 presidential commissions under, I think it was 5 presidents.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. I got that verified by my friend, Father Bill Miscampbell, who's a great biographer of Hesburgh. I thought, well, good enough for Hesburgh, good enough for me, I suppose. And, you know, Hesburgh, there's no way he could have agreed with all those presidents. They're from different parties, right? But I think he's felt as an American and being given the opportunity to bring Catholic teaching to bear, I mean, why would you say no? And that was pretty much my attitude.
What other kinds of members were on the commission?
It was an interesting mix of people. You had some very legal types, people who have argued these cases before the Supreme Court. You had religious leaders, so like myself and Cardinal Dolan was on it. You had someone like Ryan Anderson, who's the head of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, which is a major Catholic think tank. You had cultural figures like Dr. Phil was on it, the famous Dr. Phil, who was actually very good, I thought, very bright and contributed, I think, quite well. Eric Metaxas is on it. Eric was a well-known biographer of Bonhoeffer and kind of a public commentator and various things. So it was a mix of people from different walks of life and, you know, but all of us having some real relationship to this matter of religious liberty.
Were there other religious traditions represented as well?
There were indeed, both on the commission but also on the advisory council. So there was the commission itself and then there was like an advisory board. And we people there from all kinds of different religions,
And what was the basic structure of your committee work? And especially, what did you do when you had to travel to D.C. pretty frequently?
I did.
What did you do while you were there?
Yeah, more than I expected. It was roughly once a month we met between last June and now we're just ending as we record these words. It's like mid-May. The way it worked was we gathered typically at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, which is just right off the mall. And the reason for that, I discovered, was they have a little theater that seats about maybe 300 or 400 people. And we were up on a stage. Now, I didn't really imagine it that way. I thought we'd meet in a room, just the 12 of us, and we would discuss matters. But no, it's a public event. Mm-hmm. So we were arranged usually on two tables facing each other on the stage. And then the theater is filled with viewers who are taking the whole thing in. Plus the press was there. I think every time the press is pretty well represented. The president came once in September, and the press were there in great numbers then. But it was a public hearing, is a way to think about it. And then we brought in what we call witnesses. So people, let's say that you might have scholars talking about religious liberty and the Founding Fathers, religious liberty and the jurisprudential tradition, et cetera. We also had people who were in the military and who were in healthcare and in education and were witnessing to ways religious liberty is being threatened in those environments. The one on education, that's the one the president came to. We had kids themselves. We had little kids, grade school, high school, and university students, all talking about ways that their religious liberty was threatened. So it was an interesting variety of people, some high academic types, some very serious legal types, and then also ordinary people who were kind of wrestling with this issue.
Could those who are watching, the public, could they ask questions?
Not the public, but we could. So then the witnesses would speak, and they were, I must say, excellent, almost to a person. They were really good, interesting, well-prepared statements. And then we would interrogate them. So after each, maybe you'd have three would speak, and then the chairman, a good guy named Dan Patrick, he's the lieutenant governor of Texas, and he's the chair of the committee. He would say, all right, everybody, what's on your mind? And then we would signal we wanted to speak, and we could ask a question, make a comment, and then we would talk among ourselves too, but all, in the full glare of the audience. So it was a public happening, and it was just a lively, conversation.
We'll get into more of the particulars of the work that you did in just a moment, sort of pulling back to get some more of the conceptual questions. One question that's come up frequently, and you touched on it in your introductory framing of it, is how does your role as a bishop, not only of the Catholic Church, but of the Diocese of Winona, Rochester, whose primary charge is caring for his flock here, how did you understand your work serving on a federal commission, very closely related to the government, of course?
Yeah, and I didn't see them as in conflict because, see, some people would say to me, oh, now that you're a member of the Trump administration, I say, no, I'm not a member of the Trump administration.
Right.
Someone in the Trump administration is someone who's charged with implementing the policies of Donald Trump. That's, the cabinet members and so on. We're on the other side of the ledger, if you want. We're there to help formulate policy, to make recommendations to the president. Here's something you might do in terms of legislation or executive order. So we're not implementing the decisions, we're trying to shape the decisions. So what was my role? I thought to bring the Catholic perspective to bear. Mm-hmm. See, I never felt any pressure, like I've got to conform to something. No, I'm here as a Catholic bishop, and my job is to raise questions and make comments that are congruent with the Catholic tradition and are using that tradition to inform this process. If someone disagrees with me, that's fine. That's their prerogative. We're going to formulate a final report to the president. He can take it or leave it. He can say, I don't like this. I like every bit of it. I like some of it. So I never felt a compulsion like I had to say things in a certain way or I better be careful about. Never. I felt I'm going to speak my mind as a Catholic bishop. Also, I'm an American citizen. Yeah. And the president of the United States invited me to be on this commission. All right. And I saw no contradiction between my being a Catholic bishop and an American citizen and never felt pressure from either side. Again, taking Hesburgh as my model, who did this, with great aplomb, I tried to do it in the same way.
There's some who argue, especially from a secular perspective, that it's okay for quote unquote religious people to serve on bodies like this, but they must leave their religion at the door. How do you respond to that kind of
that's
claim?
repugnant to America. I guess repugnant to the First Amendment. I mean, the free exercise of religion. And that means it's not just a matter of private worship or I'm something I whisper to my co-religionists, but it's something I can exercise in the public forum. That's a good example of it. I mean, so I can bring my perspective to bear in a public debate. I'm not imposing my religion. I'm not using the secular arm, to compel people to see things my way. But I'm entering into the public debate precisely as a Catholic and as an American. And I think there's no contradiction there.
Let's get some more clarity on what defines religious freedom, because it can be kind of an unwieldy concept, so it needs some clarity. Where does it, from a specifically Catholic perspective, we could perhaps even say a natural law perspective, where does it emanate from morally, and perhaps we could even say anthropologically as well?
Human dignity, I think. And that's why it's interesting, Matt, that coming out of the specificity of my religious tradition, so as a biblically shaped Catholic Christian, I believe in the intrinsic dignity of the individual made in God's image and likeness. Well, part of that dignity is that what is most precious to me, what's in the treasure house of my conscience, should never be coerced. That there should never be some external coercion imposed upon my convictions in regard to the deepest and most precious things in life. So what your religion is, your relationship to God. There should be no coercion of that inner sanctum of the conscience. So that's where it comes from. It's a paradox in a way. It's precisely as a biblically formed Catholic that I hold to the principle of religious liberty.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what was in the mind of the vast majority of the founders of our country, is they didn't see a contradiction. They saw it coming up out of their Christian convictions. I say it's a paradox because it's your Christianity that's preventing you from imposing your Christianity on somebody, right? It's your very Christian convictions that tell you you've got to respect the religious liberty of everybody else. Now, can and should we have lively religious debate? Yes. And my job as a Catholic, I want to bring Christ to everybody. I want to bring the fullness of Christ, which to my mind means becoming a Catholic Christian. Fine. But I can't do it in a way that is now coercing or using the secular arm to coerce people. That's where religious liberty comes from.
Play devil's advocate here. Some may, again, argue from a more secular perspective, may hear that framing of religious liberty and say, yes, absolutely. And what that means is that religion has to do with the conscience. It has to do with your interior life. And please feel free to have these debates, but all outside of the public sphere. So how do we frame the religious liberty in such a way so that it's understood as having a place in public life as well?
No, because what goes on in your conscience now will manifest itself publicly. So you say, here's what I've come to in conscience, and the Constitution gives me the right to the free exercise of my religion. So these are my convictions. You can't coerce me in that regard, and you can't compel me to privatize what my conscience has dictated to me. Now, as long as I'm not being aggressive to you. I'm not trying to impose myself on you, but I can freely exercise my religion. See, I think that's the part of the First Amendment we tend to overlook, the free exercise clause, right? Or we underplay that, or we turn that into privatized, the right to worship as you choose. No, the exercise. I think it's out in space. That's where I exercise my religion. And so there's got to be freedom in that arena.
You've often described religious freedom as a first freedom, in the sense it's a foundational freedom for other freedoms. Say a little bit more about how it plays that role.
Yes, I think for two reasons. One is in our constitutional framework, the First Amendment talks about religious liberty. It's the first liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. So just kind of in a chronological sense. But also I'm following John Paul II here, that it's the most basic of the freedoms. It's the most basic of the rights because it is so precious to us. It's what's most elevated and what's of primary concern to me. And so all the other liberties and rights flow from it in a way. They're related to it as periphery to center. So that if religious liberty is compromised, the other ones are close behind. And I think that's been demonstrated over and over again. In fact, in the totalitarianisms, certainly of the last century, what was their opening move? go after religion.
Right.
And they knew what they were doing. Karl Marx says the first critique is the critique of religion. Before you get to the critique of politics or economics or culture, you get to religion. And the great dictators knew that. The great totalitarians knew that. You first have to restrict religious liberty. The other ones will follow.
You've touched on what might limit religious freedom in terms of aggressivity or certainly violence, but say a little bit more in terms of its conceptual framing, how we can define religious liberty in such a way so that one religion's exercise of its liberty isn't going to infringe upon other religions or on those who claim no religion at all. No,
and that's the great test case in a way. Like, let's say, my religion, my conscience dictates that it's okay to abuse children.
Yeah, right.
Or let's say, these are real examples, to sacrifice an animal, or, let's say my religious convictions are leading me to do morally repugnant things. Well, no, there's a moral limit on it. And I would say as a Catholic, it's the limit provided by the natural law, that there's a consensus around certain moral behaviors that are prohibited by the natural law. Mm-hmm. But then see, now as an American, let's say my religion says that you shouldn't have any rights. My religion dictates that you don't have a right to vote. You don't have a right to free assembly. My religion says you don't have a right to religious liberty. Well, being an American now precludes that possibility. So there are restrictions kind of inherent to both the moral system and the political system that keep it from running, rampant or going berserk. Like I've got some completely unlimited, religious liberty. No, it's hemmed in both morally and politically.
And given religious freedom defined in this way, what role does the government have not only in respecting it, but also protecting it?
Yeah, well, I think that's the operative word. The government there, the Congress should make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. So first of all, it's like, do no harm. Like Congress can't make a law that is going to set limits to my religious liberty. So there's a negative thing. But I think, it's to protect it. I'll give you an example. This happened early on in our time. The state of Washington was proposing a bill that would require Catholic priests to break the seal of confession in matters of child sex abuse, right? And, motivated by the very good desire to eradicate child sex abuse, but they were grossly overreacting to say that a Catholic priest is obligated to break the seal of confession, so that the option for a priest would be either excommunication or imprisonment, right? So I and many others raised our voices to say this is a gross violation of the free exercise of religion. And happily, a judge intervened, to circumvent that. But the government should be vigilant in that regard, that it does not allow for these violations of religious liberty. It protects it. And then the Constitution itself guarantees that Congress shall make no law that would set restrictions to the free exercise of religion.
You've already touched on this, but so often religious liberty, especially in American context, is framed incorrectly, but still framed as the separation of church and state. That there's this bright line, which is, if you pointed out, does not appear in the Constitution. But again, at this more theoretical level, is it even possible to have a constitution, to have governing principles, to have a moral foundation that's completely devoid of any kind of religious content?
Well, yeah, it depends on what level we're at. Like the 30,000-foot level, I would say no, because our very Declaration of Independence. Fulton Sheen had a great line I ran across recently. He said that the Declaration of Independence, our Declaration of Independence, is in fact a declaration of dependence upon God. So it is indeed independence from a corrupt English, tyranny. Yeah. But at the same time, it's a clear affirmation of our dependence upon God. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Take God out of it, equality and rights, both even as. And so the Declaration itself is, if you want, religious. I mean, it's a clear affirmation of the role that God plays in guaranteeing equality, freedom, et cetera, and rights. So at that level, I would say, no, you can't really separate religion out. Now, what does the First Amendment say? It talks about, indeed, the free exercise, but also the anti-establishment clause. So Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion. Good. That means I don't want the government determining, here's the one religion that we're all going to, get behind, and this is the government's going to foster this religion, not the other ones. I love that. I mean, because I don't want the government involved in propping up one religion or another. That would involve, in fact, the violation of religious liberty. So that's the separation, if you want. No, we don't want a system that they were rebelling against. The English system where there was an official state-sponsored religion. I'm glad the Founding Fathers said no to that. That's a legitimate separation, if you want. The problem is, as everyone points out, the famous Jeffersonian line about, the wall of separation. It's in a letter he wrote to a Baptist convention, right? It's not in the Declaration, not in the Constitution, not in the Federalist Papers. It's not in any of our founding documents. It's in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote. And again, even what he meant by that, we had a scholar come in to talk about it. There's a lot of ambiguity about what Jefferson himself meant by that. Mm-hmm. But even if you say Thomas Jefferson felt in this private letter there should be a wall of separation, to take that as a foundational statement of our position is absolutely problematic. Now, what happened in the jurisprudence and going to the Supreme Court level from, like, say, the mid-20th century up until fairly recent years is that principle took on exaggerated importance. Yeah. And it was stressed in such a way that we got ourselves into this mess whereby any presence of religion in any public setting is just a violation of the Constitution, and we have to do away with that, and we can't have anyone praying, and the Ten Commandments, and none of that. And see, but that's I would say a gross overreading of a particular line from a letter written by one founding father, not something elemental to our Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of the problem. Now, I would say happily, the jurisprudence of the last 20 years or so has been reversing that. And we've been moving away from the Jeffersonian, wall of separation and seeing, here's to my mind, I'm no great legal expert, but simply a fair reading of the First Amendment, that the two elements of it, no establishment of religion, but also the free exercise. I think those two read together gives us a healthy environment, which, by the way, was kind of non-problematic for a lot of Americans up until the mid-20th century. Right. You look at the 19th century, even early 20th century, they didn't have these huge problems. But it was problematized in the mid-20th century, I think, because of a hyper-stress on the Jeffersonian line.
And behind that as well, some political aims as well, misusing.
Yeah.
Well, let's now turn back to your work on the commission and especially identifying the major threats to religious freedom right now. Yeah. Let's start at the sort of the higher cultural level. What kinds of ideas are circulating in society and the culture right now that are undermining religious freedom?
If there's one thing, Matt, that I would like, I hope, to be remembered for in this commission is a point that I kept making. I made it at the very first meeting. I made it at the last meeting when I was summing things up. I made it a lot during the sessions, is that the principal threat to religious liberty in our country is what I've called the culture of self-invention. Mm-hmm. That there's a kind of alternate religious view, by which I mean a really overarching grand view of the whole, which says something like, there is no God. There are no objective values. It's all a matter of my choice. It's a valorization of freedom. Think of Casey versus Planned Parenthood, 1992, the way they formulated that principle. Right. It belongs to the very nature of freedom to determine the meaning of the universe. I mean, all this nonsense. But I think what's happened is that philosophy has worked its way into our institutions and into our minds. I've argued for years it's the default position of most teenagers in America, but it's also expressed institutionally all over the place. That don't be imposing values on me. No, that's your opinion. It's not my opinion. It's all up to me to decide. Well, that philosophy, call it what you want. I've called it wokeism. If you don't like that term, I don't care what you call it. It's born of European critical theory. It's got all kinds of different tangled, unhappy roots. But that philosophy, I think, is the greatest threat to religious liberty because its advocates correctly intuit that the principal enemy of that is religion. Because the religions that believe in God, they believe in objective values, they believe in a stable human nature. See, once all that's in place, the woke philosophy is going to give way.
Right.
So that's the war as I read it. It's being fought in universities, although they largely won at the university level, I think. But it's being fought institutionally. It's being fought personally. And in my judgment, that's the greatest threat to religious liberty.
About the institutional level right now, are the threats emanating from corporations, healthcare, public education, higher education, government, all the above?
All the above. Oh. No, I think so. And in the course of the year, we had sessions on healthcare, sessions on education. We had a session on the military that was an eye opener for me. I hadn't thought that deeply about the military, but it's the wokest philosophy that's made its way into these institutions. In education, we both, come out of that world, and can you see the effects of it there? Where any attempt, I'm talking even about the grade school kids here in a way, to bring religion into that public conversation in the educational framework is met with enormous resistance. An appeal made to the Jeffersonian divide to say, no, that can't happen here. Healthcare. It's that massive problem of conscience protection. There's all kinds of people in the healthcare world that, their religious faith tells them this, medical procedure is repugnant. Mm-hmm. Do they have the right to absent themselves from it, or are they being imposed upon by this, philosophy of self-invention? So yes, it does manifest itself in all kinds of particular ways: healthcare, education, military. But I think it's worked its way into most of our institutions.
What are one or two stories that you heard in the testimony that really unsettled or surprised you?
I remember one, the day we had the kids come in. There was a little kid, and during COVID, she wore a COVID mask that said on it, "Jesus loves me," right? And she was prohibited from wearing that. The teacher told her she couldn't wear that. It didn't even say, "Jesus loves you," which would, have maybe more of a... It was just, "Jesus loves me."
Right.
But in a public school, no, we can't have that. There was a young kid, too, in one of the schools. There was a Christmas pageant in a public school, and the kids were invited to, skits and songs, and sang a Christian song at Christmas time, and was told, no, you can't do that. You can't be singing that Christmas song here, Silly in a way. Would anyone in the 19th century, early 20th century have ever raised a question about that? But an aggressive wokist philosophy will, raise questions about it.
Let's now turn to what the committee thinks can be done about it. So what are some solutions that emerged among all of you?
Well, and here I'm probably less sure-footed. I would turn to all the legal people, and there were people on the commission who were very good to know how to kind of nuance and express these things legally. So I'll cede to them when the report comes out, because they would have had some of these concrete recommendations about executive orders the president can do, or even legislation. Mm-hmm. We always were tending toward legislation if you can do it, because it's less ephemeral. The trouble with executive orders, they can be undone by the next executive, But I kind of let my legal people speak to the details of that.
What about the level of winning over public opinion or argument? One danger that I've come across is if you appeal to religious freedom in order to defend not participating in something. So say you're a doctor in a hospital and you say, I'm not going to participate in this abortive procedure or this gender reassignment surgery. Yeah. And it's because I am appealing to my religious freedom. The danger is that you've now put what's an objectively immoral act into the category of kind of religious preference, or this is just something that's been privately revealed to me. So how do we position sort of the overall debate of religious freedom and giving individuals its protections without sort of retreating into the private space of revelation?
Yeah, I know what you mean there. Maybe it's a kind of expedient because, what's happened, I go back to someone like John Courtney Murray, who felt that the natural law provided articles of peace, as he put it, that in a religiously divided country, at least we can all agree on these basic moral principles. But that's collapsed from his time. He's writing in the
Absolutely.
1950s and still had confidence in something like a shared moral perspective. So that's collapsed. And so maybe the expedient of the moment is to appeal more in a religious language, even though, as a Catholic, I'm not going to argue on specifically religious grounds against abortion or against euthanasia. I mean, I'm going to mount a natural law, philosophical argument that I hope would appeal across the board. I'm less confident than John Courtney Murray was that it'll work. I think of, Stanley Hauerwas, the great Methodist theologian, and he never liked the natural law tradition. And he was before Congress, this is many years ago, and there was an abortion-related law under consideration. And they asked him for his opinion. And he said, I'm against this law. And they said, well, why? Because Christians don't kill their children. And they said, well, I understand that, Professor, but, can you mount a more general argument? And he said, no, that's my argument. Christians don't kill their children. So I mean, there's that, just kind of just a bold affirmation of the biblical perspective. Catholics have tended to move toward natural law. I think it's culturally less promising than it was. Now we're now wading into deeper waters and a kind of a wider conversation.
But if we can use religious freedom in order to
at least protect ourselves.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's, as I say, in a kind of an expedient.
Mm-hmm. And finally, before turning to our listener question, Bishop, as the founder of Word on Fire, what relationship do you see between protecting religious freedom and evangelization?
Well, yeah, that's a good point, that we've got to have the freedom to evangelize. And if you start seeing evangelization in the public sphere as somehow it's imposing your religion, it's a threat to others. No, we have to have the right. Jesus gives us the command to declare to all nations. And so, having the right to do that politically is very important for Christians. God knows over the centuries there have been lots of limitations on it. Look around the world today. There are many countries where you cannot in any way evangelize. So that's something we got to keep our eyes on. A point I made a lot, and one reason I think our committee should continue in some form, I think, is religious liberty around the world is a major concern. And that's one of the faces of it, is the prohibition against evangelization. Thank God, in this country, we have the right to evangelize, not to proselytize in some aggressive way, not to be imposing my faith, but the right to declare it publicly, and to invite an argument about it. Thank God we have that right in our country. That's something our founding fathers saw, and we should celebrate it.
Amen. It's now time for our listener question. Today we have Charlotte from England, who is an Anglican Christian, asking whether or not we should really get hung up on denominational differences.
Oh, okay.
My name is Charlotte. I'm from the south of England in Dorset. I want to ask, to what extent should we or should we not get hung up on denominations of Christianity? I was baptized into the Church of England. I was confirmed into the Church of England almost by default. Mm-hmm. It's my community. It's where I live. It's the church here in the village. Mm-hmm. My friends, my family. Yeah, to what extent is this important or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I'll say it positively first. Of course, there are enormous points of contact between Catholicism and, for example, especially a high church Anglicanism. There'd be a lot of points of contact liturgically and practice and belief. With other Protestant denominations, lots of points of contact. And we should start with that, I think, an ecumenical conversation. So we should affirm that and not move into a simply antagonistic framework. Having said that, I think the differences make a difference. And I'm with John Henry Newman. I don't hold to the Kantian view, by which I mean, well, deep down, isn't all about being a good person. It's about ethics. So Kant famously said, religion all comes down to ethics. So liturgy and dogma and all that is fine. It's meant to lead you to be a morally upright person. I think a lot of people today, I would call them casual Kantians when it comes to religion. Right. You're Catholic, I'm Anglican, you're a Jew, you're a Muslim. As long as we all agree it's nice to be nice, well, isn't that what matters? No, I don't hold to that. I'm with John Henry Newman, your countryman. John Henry Newman, who read his Apologia Pro Vita Sua. He makes this sort of agonizing journey from achingly high Anglicanism to Roman Catholicism, but it was this gut-wrenching, soul-wrenching process for Newman because he took the doctrinal issues so seriously. So it's somewhere in there that the right answer is. You don't want to so emphasize the differences that you forget these enormous points of contact. But I say don't succumb to that casual Kantianism that says doctrinal differences don't matter. I think they do matter.
Well, thank you, Charlotte, for reaching out to us. If you would like to ask Bishop Barron a question in a future Word on Fire show, please visit askbishopbarron.com. Again, that's askbishopbarron.com. We always love to hear from you. Well, we're out of time, Bishop. Thank you. Another great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Always a pleasure.
That does it for us today. Thanks for joining us on the Word on Fire show. If you're interested in learning more about how Word on Fire can help you grow closer to Christ, become a better evangelist with and for others, and work for the common good, consider joining the Word on Fire Institute. Check us out at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. And we'll see you next time.